Imagine living on a quiet farm where everything is familiar and calm, until one night, strange noises echo from the old, abandoned barn. The creaks, scratches, and low murmurs seem impossible to explain. As you move closer, a feeling of dread sets in, but you need to know what's hiding inside. That's what happened to one farmer and his family in rural Kansas. What they uncovered in that barn shocked them to the core, and soon the whole town was talking about it. Before we reveal this chilling story, be sure to subscribe for more real-life mysteries and unforgettable encounters. The Thompson family had lived on their farm for generations, growing wheat and raising cattle in the sprawling fields of Kansas. Their land was expansive, stretching over acres, and in the middle of it all was an old barn. Once used for storing hay and housing animals, the barn had fallen into disuse over the years. Its walls were weathered, and its roof sagged. The Thompsons had little reason to go inside, and eventually it became just another fixture on their land, blending into the scenery. One evening, as the sun began to set, old Mr. Thompson and his son, Mike, were out tending to the cattle when they heard something unusual. At first, it was faint, barely audible over the rustling of the wheat fields, but then it grew louder, a rhythmic scratching sound, followed by a faint, almost whispering murmur. They looked at each other, both a bit uneasy, wondering if it was the wind. But as the night settled in, the sounds persisted, and they seemed to be coming from the barn. The two men decided to investigate. Grabbing flashlights, they made their way across the field toward the dilapidated building. The closer they got, the more they could hear. The noises were unmistakable now, scratching, tapping, and something that sounded like faint, echoing whispers. Mike's heart raced. He told himself it was probably just an animal that had found its way inside, maybe a raccoon or some bats. As they reached the barn door, they paused. The noises stopped suddenly, as if whatever was inside knew they were there. With a deep breath, Mr. Thompson pushed open the heavy, creaking door, and they both stepped inside, the beams of their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The barn was filled with stale air and dust, and as they moved further in, they could feel the weight of silence pressing down on them. They swept their flashlights over the corners, half expecting to see a critter or two, but there was nothing out of the ordinary at first glance. Just old tools, broken wooden beams, and piles of hay scattered about. But then, as they turned to leave, they heard it again, the unmistakable scratching and whispering, now coming from above. Mike aimed his flashlight up toward the rafters, and there, hidden in the shadows, was a trapdoor they had forgotten even existed. It led to a small loft they'd stopped using years ago. The sound seemed to be coming from behind that door. With a mixture of fear and curiosity, they climbed up the ladder, each step creaking under their weight. As they reached the top, they could see that the trapdoor was slightly ajar, as if someone or something had opened it. Mike pushed it open the rest of the way, and they shined their flashlights into the loft. What they saw made their blood run cold. Sitting in the loft were dozens of small, crudely carved wooden dolls. Each one was different, yet eerily similar, with dark, hollow eyes and twisted expressions. Some were propped up against the walls, while others sat in clusters, all arranged in a way that felt intentional, almost ritualistic. But the strangest part was that each doll seemed to be looking directly at them, their lifeless eyes reflecting the beam of the flashlights. And then they noticed the smell of faint, musty odor that hinted at decay. In the center of the loft, surrounded by the dolls, lay a small, dried-up bundle. Upon closer inspection, they realized it was an old piece of burlap wrapped around something solid, yet delicate. Mike carefully unwrapped it, revealing what looked like a cluster of old, brittle bones. It was then that Mr. Thompson remembered a local legend, a story he'd heard when he was just a boy. Decades ago, a reclusive woman lived on the edge of the farm. People said she was strange, always mumbling to herself and carving little dolls out of wood. They claimed she practiced dark rituals, though no one ever saw her do it. Then one day she vanished without a trace, and over time, the story faded away until now. It seemed as though these dolls, this loft, and the strange noises were remnants of her presence, echoes of a long-lost ritual. But what was even more disturbing was the realization that the scratching noises they'd heard weren't random. The dolls had been arranged in a way that suggested they were recently disturbed, as if something had been moving among them. Just as they were piecing everything together, the air grew cold, and they both felt a sudden chill. It was as if someone else was in the loft with them, watching. They turned to leave, but the trapdoor slammed shut behind them. Panic set in as they fumbled with the latch, feeling an unseen force pressing against them, holding the door closed. After what felt like an eternity, they managed to force it open and climbed down the ladder as quickly as possible. They didn't look back as they ran out of the barn, their hearts pounding. That night they locked the barn and decided it was best left undisturbed. In the following days, word of their encounter spread through the small town. Some believed the dolls held the spirit of the woman, trapped in the loft, still enacting her mysterious rituals. Others thought it was simply an eerie coincidence, a result of years of superstition and imagination. But the Thompson family was never the same. They avoided the barn, even contemplating tearing it down. Yet, on some nights, when the wind was just right, they could still hear faint whispers and the sound of something scratching, echoing across the fields. To this day, no one knows for sure what lay hidden in the old barn or why those dolls were arranged as they were. But one thing is certain: the Thompsons will never forget the night they encountered whatever was lurking in the shadows of their old barn, and they make sure to tell others to stay away. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, but if you're drawn to stories like this one, be sure to hit subscribe for more thrilling tales that delve into the unexplained.